Oh, hello everyone. We are now live. God, awkward intro is awkward. Right, this is Rocket Powered Report. It is 1:30 a.m. my time. It's 8:30 Eastern. I have with me Sphyrnidae and our special guest DMRawlings. How you doing, sir?
How's it going, guys?
It's great to be here. Another wonderful week of the power-filled topics.
Yeah, you guys are just going to listen to my keyboard really quickly while I update the stream title. But here we go. We're going to be getting into it. We've got a lot to talk about, obviously, from RLCS Week 3 and some various other little bits and pieces that have been going on. And DMR, do you want to just fill us in on exactly who you are and why you're here?
Yeah. I actually have no idea why I'm here. But
that's all right. Neither
we all have no idea why we're truly here.
But what I will say is I help run stats for RLCS. So I help the casters get prepared for broadcasts. I look for game stories. I keep tabs on who's scoring goals and everything in between. So that's kind of what I do in the Rocket League community. I am also involved with RLC in terms of doing tournaments, and way back in the Pro League I used to write a regular segment on Reddit called oh boy, what was it called now? It was called 5 Facts series of articles. That was like another lifetime ago.
Yeah.
Like 300 Rocket League years.
Nice.
Right.
Cool stuff. So we all know who Sphyrnidae is. We've got no Curtis today because Curtis is stuck in a hotel room with no internet. So
well, he's stuck with internet, but he's pretty much salvaging it from a taco stand outside. So I'm assuming at least that's
taco stands have Wi-Fi now. That's amazing.
I'm just making it as a joke. That's one of my things. I have a friend of mine back that lives maybe 2 houses down from me. That we always have this joke that if someone has really bad internet and they like start DCing while we're playing a game, we'll just be like, "Oh, are you stealing your internet from the taco stand outside again?" or something like that. Or I think one of our favorites was an Ethiopian refrigerator was where we claimed Wi-Fi came from one time. So
that sounds like actually like a really good idea of, like they combine as many things into the one thing for, the third world countries. But anyway, moving on swiftly, please. So week 3. Sorry, I just got distracted by Alstedo. Apparently you could be Cloud Fuel's brother, DMR.
I actually was mistaken as Cloud Fuel 3 times at the last LAN.
Really?
Yeah, but I'm thinking for the next LAN I want to get a shirt that says I am not Cloud Fuel.
Do it.
That would be great. I would support it.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. So RLCS Week 3 then, we had quite a lot going on, some great storylines and a little bit of drama as well, which we'll only go into briefly because I know you can't actually talk about it or sort of have an official position. The argument that there was decisions made that some people have found to be controversial. So just really quickly, like, what did you guys think of the weekend's events?
It's been interesting. I really enjoyed, as always, the EU side of things. Kind of surprised at some of the results that I saw. North America, I think was kind of what we expected, but at the same time, I would just say it was more kind of expected of what I was to see from it. But, I think just as always, at least my opinion personally, I always enjoy watching EU side of things. So Sunday was a good day for me. Saturday was an okay day for me.
Mm-hmm.
Just really a lot of interesting stories coming out of last week, like Oh My Dog being able to beat really good teams, but they can't beat teams that are close to them.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of teams. Exodus coming out with a very slow start in their first series. Yeah, probably disappointing there. But a lot of really, really good things that lead up to next week when everything gets decided.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, that's the amazing thing coming out of the weekend, actually, is that everybody has a chance right now. I don't think... Rawlings, you'll probably know better than me. Is there any team that can't make playoffs officially now?
So I ran the numbers, and I'm really not 100% sure because it gets pretty dicey when it comes to some of the tiebreakers. But you look at Summit, and I think even if they play perfectly, it is going to be exceptionally hard, maybe impossible for them to make it to the playoffs. But aside from that, it's open season. In North America, I project 2 wins under certain circumstances could cause a 3-way tie, which could cause a 2 and 5 team to make the playoffs.
Okay.
So it really is anyone's game in a 7-game season. It really comes down to how you did in individual series.
Yeah, and that's actually really interesting because a lot of people have said. So a lot of people have said, you know, seven series is too short for a season. But in my eyes, I just find that makes every series really important, which it is kind of where it gets interesting for me, because if you told me at the beginning that we were going to go into week 4 with, you know, it completely up in the air and we have no idea who's actually going to be making playoffs, you know, anybody could get in at this point, it is really interesting to me. And I think that that's a fantastic narrative that RLCS have managed to achieve. And whoever ran the numbers and got the league matches organised in the order that they did a great job of making it exciting every week. I mean, there's not really been any games where I've kind of looked at it and gone, oh, well, that was just a bit boring to watch, you know?
Yeah, you've got Nintendo to blame for some of these great great stories.
That's it, exactly. Or in the team's cases, the stress that he's caused them by them not knowing for sure if they're in playoffs yet.
I'll just say that there's a number of teams in North America that are asking what it's going to take, and I'm getting messages here and there saying, you know, what do we need to do to lock in a 1 or 2 spot, for instance?
Yeah.
And my answer typically in scenarios like that is, okay, I'm doing this off the top of my head. Do not treat this as gospel.
Yeah.
But, you know, and then a big block of text. And then them asking a bunch of questions and me going, maybe? You know, it's really anyone's game. Because there's 2 games that most teams are playing in week 4, it's really, really hard to project exactly which, you know, what the teams are going to take in order to there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think going into this, you know, it's kind of funny, DMR, just you mentioning that, because I'm sure there's a lot of teams right now that are just playing so many what if cards, like, what if we did this semester? Yeah, we're in school now, boys. You know, what if we did this? What if we did that? It's always kind of funny to me when people do that, because they're like, it's pretty much like a bare minimum thing. It's like, what is the bare minimum that we can get away with that, like, if something bad was to happen, we'll be okay? You know, one of those things. So I'm sure, DMR, you get bugged with this all the time. I'm sure it's
I mean, my answer is just keep winning and you'll do fine.
I mean, that's true. At the end of the day,
yeah.
I mean, just
although
keep winning.
at this point you've also got to like try and win by win your series by losing the least number of games in case of win percentage tiebreakers. So, should we run through quickly? Let's just go through the results from Saturday. So we had Take 3, 3-0 Deception. Anyone surprised by that?
Not necessarily. It was more interesting to me that they actually lost to Genesis by getting 3-0'd by them. I think that was more interesting to me personally. Yeah, Genesis, that is, getting 3-0'd by Genesis. Take 3. Yeah, I said that right. I'm sorry. But yeah, I thought that was actually more interesting than that. Deception was a little bit cooled down. It sounded like they weren't going to be on the top of their game from what I was looking at earlier. So I can understand that. It didn't surprise me a ton. I just still think the Genesis thing still surprised me because, you know, now granted, you know, having a close series against Exodus probably warmed them up more, you know, to get ready to go. I mean, sometimes you get that first series, I have a feeling that it helps you out a ton, especially if you play a really good matchup like you did.
Well, Exodus Genesis as well was a really close series because that was actually a reverse sweep by Exodus.
Okay.
So that was intense because Exodus had just come out of being 3-0'd by Vindicator, which used to be Vendetta before they got picked up by Vindicator. That was an intense series to watch. I mean, I think we were all on the edge of our seats all the way through that series going, like, what is going on? Exodus's first series that they lose is to Vindicator? In a sweep?
And, you know, did anyone at the beginning of the week call that Exodus was going to lose 5 games in a row?
Well, this is it, right? That's it. So
no one predicted that.
And then somehow they managed to pull it out, and I mean, it really speaks to just the pure athleticism of these guys, that they're able to be in a mental space to come back off the back of losing 5 games in a row to be able to reverse sweep their second series of the day is really intense. Like that's very impressive.
We used to compare back in the day, when I used to be really, really into just playing like every sport possible, having that competitive mindset to realize that you're struggling at that point, and then to just basically 180 your own self to start focusing a lot harder, build adrenaline and just like be like, okay, I suck right now. I need to be a lot better, and not be upset about it, but rather that you are more focused and determined to become better. So I think that's what really helped him out. And I agree with you, Silent. I think it's really cool when you see, as Shogun calls them, cyber athletes.
No, they're
it's cool to see this,
guys. Athletes.
Athletes? Oh God, that actually sounds worse. But it's really cool when you see, like, in competitive environments, when you can actually watch some of these players just basically 180 themselves. I would have loved to hear what their comms would have sounded like at that time, in all honesty.
That's actually something that I would love the RLCS to do in like season 3 or well, I suspect that they probably can't because it won't be PG, but I would love to get an insight into like team comms, in Formula 1 where you, like every now and then it'll dial you into the team radio and what the driver's talking about with the pits. Like I'd love to get that kind of thing.
I personally like what the NFL does. It's kind of cool. Every so often they'll mic up a specific player. Either the team organization will choose to do so, or the actual NFL organization, or just one of the broadcasting companies will do it, and they'll just throw a mic on them for the day, for the game, and you can hear all that they talk. And it'd be kind of cool to kind of get some of the same things for Rocket League. Again, I'd like to hear. Sometimes what happens when especially moments like this, where you come back from a reverse sweep, like you got to tell me that game 5, those guys, as soon as they won, were like freaking just like screaming, "We actually freaking did it! Wow, we're good!"
Yeah.
Whoa.
Well, that's
it. It really is those moments, like you see them at the LAN, where, say, G2, formerly IBP Cosmic, was playing some games, and they were kind of feeding off of each other's energy, and just having a chance to see that as a fan is really exciting, just to see their success and how they fed off of each other. And I totally agree. Getting a little bit more into the game with, possibly miking up a player and, showing some highlights with some player speech in there, that would be really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's something that the viewers would be really interested in seeing as well, because for somebody who's just watching this, like, it's very interesting to me, especially. I'm always very keen to know exactly what the players are talking about. What call-outs are important. At what point, how much of it is just an inherent awareness of what their teammates are going to do next based on the position that everybody is on the field, and how much of it is like specifically, I'm calling you off this ball because I'm going to go for it, or there's a breakdown in rotation. How do they reset that? I'm really interested in all of that stuff, and I don't think that when you're seeing team, like there's lots of players that stream, and you can watch them on Twitch, but there's not so often that you can see players at that level streaming while they're doing tournaments, and obviously they can't stream RLCS individually, so there's no way for us to get insight, as to what the team mindset is at the sort of most intense that it can be. So
I think what would be also kind of interesting too on this subject, I think we right now have the player interviews that we do, right? And that's live and everything. Even if it was to like do an off session sort of thing, like an interview before you get into the whole sequence, I think that'd be kind of cool too, because then you can touch on a couple other questions that maybe you don't have the time for. Maybe ask them a couple extra questions and then just kind of choose like the quality answers that you get out of it or something like that. Yeah. So like ask them 7 questions, deliver 2 or 3 of them edited onto a broadcast. I think it'd be cool to do something like that. As well, because I think that'd be you can get a side of players that you get to actually talk to them more about how their team is feeling, what they've been doing this week, how are they prepping, what is their competitive mindset when they go into something. I think it'd be really cool to see them build something like that. So, and again, this is only the 2nd season we've ever seen of RLCS, and shortly following the first RLCS, so not seeing everything right now. It's
Yeah.
just like, oh, it's okay. We have time. We can figure other production things out.
I think there's definitely room for more production stuff, and
Oh yeah.
it would be interesting to see what they do in the future. Like, I'd love to see what's going to go on around LAN as well, because I really liked the stuff they did at the last LAN. I'd like to see them do more
Yeah.
of that and
Right.
sort of expand on that as well. I mean, ideally, I'd like them to get me in and interviewing some players, seeing as I'm actually going to be there. But yeah, I can but dream. JDL replied to a tweet that I said, oh, because he tweeted saying, oh, who's going to Amsterdam? And I said, I am. Now all I need to do is, get somebody to let me cast. He did reply to that and say that maybe I could do passport control. Shot down.
Ouch.
Casting
Ouch.
shot
GG.
passport control. Like that's a
GG.
test of a caster. If you can make that interesting, you got the job. Done. But
Exactly.
yeah, so other results from the weekend then. Let me just pull this back up. So
Miracles do happen. G2 was finally able to take a series
Yes.
after their drought. It's, I
Really
think
important one too against a Vindicator. That'll be
Yes.
important if they go to a two-way tiebreaker.
Yeah.
Oh, good to know. But I think even against NRG, I still think that was fine, going against that 5-game series. But now, DMR, I'll be honest, I'll ask this question to you. What do you feel about G2's current stance right now in the standings?
So if they win two, they are at the mercy of some of the other teams. But if they win two, they end up 3 and 4. It's a good chance that they're going to be in a block of people that are tied at that 3 and 4 record. And if their win percentage is good enough, which it's not right now,
Yeah.
but if they go lights out, they go 6-0, then it could be really interesting as soon as we get to tally all the scores in the end.
Right. Looking at standings, by the way, they are currently tied with Deception, excuse me, for the last spot. So I'm actually surprised. It's almost like as if they're playing a kind of the same thing that they did last year, where they were on the lower part of the rankings, and then look, they were able to make it through playoffs, and then just barely make it to LAN, and then people were still calling them underdogs, and then boom, LAN happened, and now they were playing like gods. So
Well, in the first group stage, they were playing lights out. And in
Right.
the second one, they faltered significantly with
Yes.
the roster that they had. Over Zero came in. All of that disruption kind of went on. And they really struggled in that second half. They didn't make the playoffs, I think, on a tiebreaker. And as a result of that, the only reason that they qualified for the LAN at all is because they won the first leg of the first RLCS. And they basically coasted on their own coattails all the way to the LAN. Well, the thing is, you get to the LAN, and all of that doesn't matter anymore. You have a fresh chance, and anything is possible, as we obviously saw.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. And I think that there's definitely a case to be made that G2 shows up when there's a bracket. That if there is a bracket that they are going through, rather than it being like league play or group stages, like they just tend to do a lot better if they're in a bracket, and it's a really interesting phenomenon. And they get called the LAN boys and stuff because they showed up so massively in LAN. I mean, in LAN it came down to them and 3 EU teams, and they went all the way through, just smashing through the upper bracket until they.
And I think that really undercuts the amount of preparation that they did coming in. You look at the RLCS 1 at the LAN, and two teams that overperformed by everyone's expectations were the Flying Dutchman and G2, IBP at the time.
Yeah.
And both of those teams, in my opinion, are the ones that did the most homework before they showed up and understood who they were up against and used that as their advantage.
Well, the first episode of RPR, I called out Kings of Urban for not doing enough homework. Because they did not look like they knew how to play against EU teams at all. And you saw them go up very quickly, sort of as a consequence of that. So I think that that's something that the way the league plays going at the moment is very interesting, because I think that the fact it's regionalized is obviously kind of essential, because ping is such a huge deal in Rocket League. Everything can happen so fast. Like any kind of latency can totally change what's going on.
We've tried that in the past with mixed results, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, that's it exactly. I mean, you can't ever predict exactly how the connection across the pond is going to actually go. But the teams, you can get lulled into a false sense of security where you kind of feel like you know everybody. But if you make it through to LAN, like half the teams there are teams that you have literally not played against. And that means that you have to do a lot more kind of VOD homework. And I've heard a lot of people, Sad when he was on TTT last week, said that he gets to know a team by playing against them. He finds it hard to... I can't remember if he said specifically, but I certainly got the impression that he finds it hard to sort of understand the play style unless he's playing against them. So that means that half of the teams that you're going to play at LAN, or potentially could play at LAN, are complete unknowns to you. Which, again, is really interesting. Like, I find it's a great narrative. It just shows how much prep the teams need to do.
Right. Yeah. I think was a fun example for this. I remember that G2, back when they were IBP, that they were going to play in an Oceanic tournament. And I think it was 4 days or 3 days, something like that. They played only on Oceania servers. For the record, by the way, where they were all living at, the lowest ping I saw for any of them was 140. Most of the time, they're playing between 180 and 200 ping. So having that preparation and understanding there's going to be a slight delay if I do this, remember whatever that it would be, is something that you need to always, study up on. And speaking of which, seeing what G2 is doing right now is kind of surprising me. So midweek, or I keep calling it midweek, mid-season mayhem, when that happened, they cleared out and didn't even lose a game. So my question was it because they had something totally different that time? Was it just because apparently they all played too much Rumble? What are you guys' thoughts on this? Like, why do you think they didn't just clear out what they should have cleared out this week?
So I think there's two reasons.
Okay.
The first is in weeks 1 and 2, there was a lot of distraction going on for G2 as a team.
Yes.
They had Kronovi and Overzero moving together, and like when you move, that's incredibly disruptive. And for people that are used to playing every day and put in their time and need to practice, that can really have a toll.
30 hours of driving was what it took Overzero to get there. It's nuts.
So the other major factor in my mind is Lichinio and Crow are probably, Gambit being also in this group, are among the top SARP players. And in SARP, you dealt with balls that moved a lot faster, hit off your car much harder, and you had more funky maps, so you needed to be more grounded in the fundamentals of the mechanics of the game. So all of a sudden they go into strange maps, and they're like, hey, we know this. We may not have played on this map before, but our understanding of the physics of the game is far more nuanced than other teams that just haven't had a chance to play on these maps before. And you add both of those up, like the ability for G2 to finally sit down and focus and get settled in their new place, as well as Lichinio and Kronovi's just breadth of experience. And I would have never expected them to go 9-0, but I definitely expected them to do well in that tournament because in North America, there's Fireburner and there's Sad Junior, but there's fairly wide distribution of SARP talent.
Yes.
Well, I've got a theory on that builds on that actually.
Okay.
So sort of taking that point to a higher level. So what we've seen from G2 over the course of pretty much all of the league play, and it is slowly going back to how it was. We've seen a totally different playstyle from them than we saw at LAN. So at LAN there was lots of solo plays, lots of like seat of the pants, instinctive decision making. We actually saw them doubling up on a lot of balls, but it was okay because they have the sort of individual skill to be able to sort of carry that through. And what we've seen in weeks 1, 2, and some of week 3 is we've seen them going for a lot of team plays, which they're not really known for doing. Like there's been lots of situations, especially in weeks 1 and 2, I picked up on this a lot. Like just, oh look, there's Kronovi. Okay, he could just dribble that guy, but he's gone for a pass instead, and the pass isn't actually the best decision to make there. And it's like they're trying overly hard to play as a team. I know that they've been drilling hard as a team from Overzero and Crow being on Beliefs podcast, The Dojo, which I recommend checking out, by the way. They were saying that they've been drilling a lot of passing plays and drilling a lot of like sort of teamwork focused practice. And when you take those guys and put them into a mid-season mayhem, passing plays don't work all that well. You kind of just have to make solo plays. especially for Rumble as well. Like, you just have to do the best thing that you can do in that situation. And we saw them win repeatedly. And a lot of it was just they were making decisions based on what can I do in this situation rather than who can I give it to in this situation.
I think just a fun like little side thing that I was thinking of was, you know, this is a weird example. This is a weird example. I don't know how much you'll agree with this, but I feel like G2 is playing like an EU team right now. And the reason I say that is because as a lot of that I've seen, Silent, of course, you are well aware that one of my main tournaments that I'm able to cast a week, because thank goodness for schedules, is the Gfinity EU on Fridays. So, of course, I watch European teams on a pretty consistent basis. So I think it's pretty interesting when you look at this that I watch Mocket Aces, Flipside Tactics, and a lot of times Reunited, that they have a 3-man pass play that goes in where it could just be a simple delivery right in front of the net to launching it down the field, redirecting off the backboard, and sitting it off to someone else. And I noticed that a lot in European play. And actually, a couple players I've individually talked to about this have mentioned this as well. And they kind of joke about it, like on their own personal, like European side of things. They're like, this is only an NA thing that people do. They like to go for a lot of more collaborative play. They like to set up that redirected pass in order to set something up to be more efficient. They're aware when they need to shoot something off to the side. So that's the reason I say that is I feel like they're playing like a European team. They want to try to set up those passes, to get to each other and get everything all set.
I think there's an argument to be made on that. I mean, we've talked
Sure.
quite a few times on previous weeks, and DMR, I'd be interested in your opinion on this regarding the sort of disparity between the EU and the North American regions regarding sort of the culture of sports that are popular.
Yeah.
So, because North America has a lot of sports that, the faster paced sports tend to have less sort of passing involved. So, like hockey, you can pretty much take a shot from anywhere. Basketball is kind of similar. You tend to get to a reset situation and then somebody will make a play. Whereas with the sports that are popular in Europe, with rugby and football, like rugby, there's a lot more resets than football, but with football, like nobody is ever going to get a dribble all the way down the pitch and score. Like that,
Right.
When that happens, it's a huge deal because
Right.
the number
It's
of
rare.
barriers to that happening are ridiculous. Then you got
Right.
stuff like in the US, the NFL and baseball and all these kinds of things where there's a much slower pace. Like it's periods of high activity followed by inactivity, followed by periods of high activity, followed by inactivity. And I just feel like it's a cultural thing to some extent.
Yeah, I think so. In retrospect, actually, now that I think about that, I know you mentioned that before, but now kind of like thinking about it again, I actually agree with you a lot on that, Silent, because a lot of our plays, will be, reset into it. Like, for example, baseball, guy swings for it. If he hits it, he goes to the next base. Then it's the next person up. And there's that break between that period. Basketball, shot goes in. That's going to go off to someone who's going to pass it in. And then it's just back to, the other side
Goes
to
back
defend.
to point guard
Just
transition. Sets the play. Yeah.
Right. And then football, American football, just to be clear for anybody EU-wise. I don't know if you're that on tech, whatever. But like for example, any touchdown, any field goal, whatever, it resets to the kickoff, different teams, special teams, defense, offense, they go along with it. It makes sense. We're used to that reset. So maybe, like that could be the play style just really coming into effect for us.
Well, it's interesting because even in North America, I think there's a disproportionate number of footballers that play Rocket League as compared to many other sports. Like I found out Turtle is a soccer player when he was younger. I don't think he keeps it up now, but Lachidio, big soccer player, played a ton of soccer when he was younger.
Yeah.
And I think that the kind of players that are drawn towards the game are the kind of players that gave football some attention back when they were younger. Because now we're basically playing football with a car, right?
Right. Well, that's it.
Right.
So it's tricky to say. I'm a big hockey fan. I'm a big supporter of my local Vancouver Whitecaps football squad. Not big on many of those stop and start kind of games. American football is 13 minutes with a 60-minute timer, and I don't understand. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying it's not for me. Basketball, I think, from a game design perspective, is just deeply flawed. And I've had this conversation with people before. It just seems like it was built to be not fun.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely enjoyed playing basketball when I was younger, but it's not a sport that captured me in the same way that football or rugby or even cricket did. So
Right, and that's even our separation too, because like for myself, my two favorite sports is baseball and basketball. It's probably in a slight bit of bias because my father is a basketball coach for a varsity girls team and has like multiple titles in it. My other brother is currently a college coach for basketball, and my other brother is a referee over in another state for that, but was also formerly a coach as well.
So basically, you have no choice here.
Well, it's one of those things that like you grew up in that scenario.
Yeah.
So there's that. Of course, all of us, my dad through both my brothers and myself, have played basically the same sports. Interestingly enough, we were all set the same records except in basketball. My what would be my younger, well, the second oldest brother. There we go. We don't have records in points, but other than that, we have records in the same thing. It's kind of funny, honestly.
Yeah.
But that's how I grew up. But of course, I played soccer myself, and that's my main category. I got records in for being a good goalkeeper. So like that, I just love soccer for the fact that it was a really good team sport. I think that was one of my favorite things about it. But I agree with what DMR says. Like for me personally, to watch regular soccer for 60-minute periods like that, I don't know. Like watching from TV is a totally different story. Being there, I love the culture. Not being there, no.
A 90-minute game, yeah, absolutely. And then
Right.
you've got your halftime show and stuff like that. And that's something that I'd be interested in your opinion on as well, Rawlings. So what do you think the potential is for a longer form Rocket League? So like a 10-minute game with a break in the middle, switch sides,
I mean, we
maybe
can
more
just
players
customize the
on a
game
team.
and do it right now.
Like a larger map, 5 players on a team type of idea.
Are you saying
Okay,
octagon
so
for 10 minutes?
there's a lot to unpack there. I would need to be shown the benefit of a longer form game. One of the things that makes Rocket League really compelling is if I've got 10 minutes, I can just boot it up and play a game.
Yeah,
right.
From a competitive standpoint, I think that the current format where we do a best of X, 5 or 3 or preferably 7, is a really good way of finding the best team. And longer games, I don't know what problem they're actually solving, because we find the better team now, and it would be kind of fun to do, maybe a 2-half game and give that a try. But I don't know. Aside from trying to make it look more like conventional sports, I don't see what we're gaining out of that.
Let me refine this, actually. So we have our current best of 3, best of 5, best of 7 series that we're doing, Rawlings. What do you think about running the same time for that, but instead of a best of series, we actually make it quarters? What if we did something like that? So like, let's say we do a 4-quarter system, and then don't reset the score between it. What do you think? So basically, let's call it this. Let's play basketball. I'm just gonna think of it like basketball then. 5-minute periods, same exact rule concept. Just there's a minor like 30-second break between quarters, and then you're back at it again.
Yeah, so I guess that gives teams an opportunity to come from behind.
Right.
But what I do find is that having fresh starts is really good for the game, good for the psychology of players on teams.
Yeah.
Like they can go, I lost that game, but this is a new one and I can win this one. Whereas as someone, like I played 2 games when I was a kid. I played soccer and football, I guess, and I played box lacrosse. and box lacrosse, at the end of a period, you go into the locker room and you're looking at being 3 or 4 or 5 goals down, and and you go, oh man, what are we going to need to do to get back in this one?
Mhm.
If it was like a best of 3 20-minute game, I think that frames the game in a very different way. And really, I just have to see it. I think is what it comes down to. And as for 5v5 on a bigger field, yes, please. If that's performant, if you can get that many vehicles going on the same pitch at a time, then I definitely want to see that, because I do enjoy the team aspects of the game. And I would like to see how more specialized roles might begin to get defined as
Yeah.
the number of cars on the pitch increases.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
that
I
it's
think
really
go ahead.
interesting to investigate as an esports only mode. So the touchstone that I would give for this is actually a game that went the other direction, which is World of Tanks. World of Tanks standard multiplayer match is 15 versus 15, but
Mhm.
the esports variant is like a 5+2 format. So you've got five high tier tanks plus two low tier tanks, and you use the low tier tanks as sort of scouts. So I'm not thinking, but it's really interesting because that's the competitive format where you've got a 7-man team versus another 7-man team, but you've removed 8 players on each side from that equation.
Yeah, and I think there's serious logistical reasons why that happens as
Oh,
well.
yeah,
It is
absolutely.
very hard to have a team with that many members on it.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
Rocket League has 3-person teams, and it's hard enough for them to get together to do
well,
basic scrims.
well,
If it
this
was
is
a
the thing.
5-person team, it's even less likely.
Well, this is the thing. I think that it needs a bit more of a developed culture for it. So, like, once the esport is a little bit larger, there's more things for these teams to compete in. Then it's going to be more common to see teams sort of become full time for starters. When there's more potential prize money that a team could earn in a year, and that kind of thing, it becomes a much more viable proposition. And then we see more team availability. But I think that it's actually really hard to have a 3-person team, because I can't think of any other sport, with the exception of like doubles tennis and doubles badminton, where you have a team that small.
Well, there's two sides of the story. So I feel like, me personally, I always kind of enjoyed, and this is just soccer experience, where I would get together and we would play like a 3v3 or 4v4 matchup, indoor soccer basically,
Mm.
but on a smaller extent. You always kind of enjoyed that because there can be this opportunity of your own individual self doing a significant play, or you can have a simple team play exchange between one or two players, all maybe even all three if you want to. So I kind of like the 3v3 format that we have going. I do see what you mean though, Silent. And I think it would be cool to see what happened, but I'm almost curious if there is this spectrum of players that, because of the format that it's at right now, they feel like it's so fast paced because you're always actively involved with it. If something happens with you adding more players, people, let alone, already hate 4v4 chaos. Adding other
But that's
players
because
to
it's
that.
but that's because you're putting 4v4 chaos into the same size pitch.
True.
So everyone
I
just ends
gotcha.
up ball chasing because everybody feels like
Hmm.
they're that close to the ball that they can just get there.
Hmm. Right. So yeah,
It's
I
also
mean,
really unstructured as well.
Yeah.
true.
There's no ranked mode for chaos. I think that it'd be something. Again, I don't think that this is something that would necessarily be like a public playlist.
Hmm.
Um, I think that
Beta tested.
yeah, I think that a 5v5, like 50% larger pitch, would be really interesting, and I
Hmm.
think that the pitch should be longer than it is, like 50%, like say 60% longer and 40% wider would be really interesting to see how that worked. And then you could have the potential as well for sort of non-standard maps where there was a sort of barrier in the middle, so it's a lot harder to do just like a straight down the field kind of play. Or there's a lot of potential that you can do when you've got an extra, in a 5v5 situation in Rocket League. Like, you could potentially just have somebody whose job it is to sort of float around at the top of the walls and on the ceiling and come down from that position to attack into passes and that kind of thing. And it opens
Yeah.
up like a whole huge amount of strategy in a game as fast paced as Rocket League, to have like those potentially extra players.
Hmm.
Then zoning out defense becomes really important. I mean, you could have somebody just dedicated to just sitting at the top of the field and just stealing boost and bumping players, and you see a lot more sort of team plays. when you've got 3-man teams, it's very difficult to take the player ego out of the team.
Yeah.
And that's sort of my biggest problem with it. And it's something that we actually see quite a lot. And I've written articles about sort of the, a lack of professionalism and a need for more professionalism within the sport. But it's like you said, Sphyrnidae, when you're on a 3-man team and you're involved in every play, and you feel like you're the star, and you got three players on a team that are all stars. And I'm not saying that every player on a team shouldn't be a star, but you have that you have that ego conflict. It's a lot easier to build a team with more people because it dilutes that.
Yeah, I think I would say that this, if we were to invest heavily into it, I think is going to have to happen after a while after this game has been out.
I think that it's going to be like a 2-3 year down the line. I mean, this is a future thing.
Because if we do it right now, like, this is my thoughts. If we do this right now, so I'm just going to say, let's do a 6v6, and we're going to proportionate the map to be, what do you think, double the size?
No, I think
double?
5v5. I think 5v5 is where it has to
5v5?
Because the other thing with that is that then it becomes a lot easier for esports teams in other environments to transition out into Rocket League.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, because most esports are 5-man teams.
Yeah.
I think
it's familiar, I guess.
That's actually one of the things that I think Overwatch has come up against a little bit, is that it's 6-man teams. When it's so common to have 5-man teams that, like, organizations, when they're thinking about budgeting a team, they're budgeting the team in terms of 5 people, and then when all of a sudden it's budgeting 6 people, like that, you see they're a little bit slower to sort of move on that, and I think that goes the other way as well.
I also see that as a bit of a competitive advantage too. If the LAN scene, if there are other events that are LANs that are not RLCS, if that picks up and there are more organizations that are involved, it's much cheaper to transport 3 players than it is to transport 5.
Yeah,
right.
I'll definitely agree with that. So, and I think that is something that's going to happen over time as well. I think that it really, I mean, it's barely been a year and a half. I mean, it's not a year and a half since the game. Came out,
we've talked about this before.
We got a lot of time.
In general, like, because I think at one point, I remember if it was just an exchange between us here or wherever I said this, but it's like, we need to remember that this game was only a year and a half old. We can't expect them to literally make everything perfect to the nitty gritty detail right now. So I think we can't necessarily just go, oh yeah, totally. I expect everything done by next Tuesday, when there's like 2 million other things to do. Even talking to, and this is something that I've talked to just between like Eric and other people at Psyonix. I mean, they only have 50 people. You need to remember that they are not gods, and they're not working 24/7, 365 on this. They have other lives to attend to.
Still a small studio.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that
remember that this is an indie game. This wasn't a AAA production. This isn't just a side note. Overwatch. This is totally off subject, but Overwatch hit 20 million players just recently. And how long has that game been out? But remember, this is also a Blizzard game, and they had a massive studio built behind it. So
and they have a huge BattleNet advantage as well.
Yeah, that's it. The players, they've got over, is it over 90 million registered Hearthstone players now?
I think so.
The number of WoW players is still ridiculous. I mean, the number of people that have come back to WoW when Legion came out is incredible. I mean, I know people who said they would never touch that game again, who have come back to WoW because Legion is so interesting to them, because it's resurrecting a storyline that, one of the storylines that got them into it. It's just absolutely crazy. But what it was you, Rawlings, actually, that sort of put it into our Skype chat earlier. We're the most played core PC games, and we're number 8 with Rocket League, which is just amazing. Like that's
no
great.
idea what their methodology is for that, but it's exciting to see Rocket League up there amongst other incredibly well-known games.
Yeah, well, it's powered by Overwolf, so Overwolf tracks the games that are open on your computer and a lot of people have Overwolf because by default it's installed with TeamSpeak. You have to uncheck the box if you don't want Overwolf when you're installing the game. And if you use TeamSpeak on a regular basis, it's really handy.
Don't have Overwolf.
Yeah, well, you should, because it's really handy when you're using TeamSpeak to have like whose name it is coming up in the top corner of your screen. and you can.
Oh, Discord does the same thing.
Yeah, I have Discords turned off actually because I find it really annoying compared to
I
the
do
overall
too.
TeamSpeak one. But
Right.
yeah, so it's I think there's a very bright future. So something though, if we sort of revisit the RLCS and we come back around to that.
Yeah, the RLCS, I remember that.
Yeah, that's the thing that's going on at the moment. So we had.
How about EU? We talked NA pretty good there.
Well,
Yes.
before we move on to EU, we have to briefly cover the point of controversy. And I don't want to spend too much time on this because I think that at the
let's
end of
just
the day,
kind of
decisions
discuss
have
what
to
it
be
is.
made. So in the Revival NRG series, Revival were about to win. It was 2-1. Sorry, I think it was 2-1 in the series, and if they weren't, they were on track to win a game. And this game that they were on track to win, they were actually playing with Prem, because at the start of the game, Hot Wheels said his internet had died, and he wasn't able to get into the game. So within 30 seconds of the game starting, there was a reset. Prem came in, so this is why you have subs, guys. Looking at you, Vogan. So we see Prem taking the place of Hot Wheels Sid. Prem, by the way, for his RLCS debut, played fantastically. Like, he looked really strong on that team, and they were on track to sort of win that game. And then Jacob and Fireburner were having connection issues for the majority of the game, and were talking to the RLCS people in the background, saying that they had connection issues for the majority of the game, and the game ends up being reset because under the rules that half the players had an issue connecting to that game, because Hot Wheels Sid was the third player to sort of be able to trigger a late game reset. It's an exceptional situation. The rules don't cover that specifically, so they reset the game, and then NRG goes on to win the series.
Well, here's the only thing I'm going to say about this, because I don't want, and I know DMR, we don't want you to push anything on this. Here's what I'm going to put. So I'll just bring up an example from my sports days when stuff like this happens. So let's just say you get this really bad curveball thrown at you. I've had moments where, a referee would blow like 4 or 5 calls in overtime that almost would cost you the game. Now, there's 2 things you can do. You can be really frustrated about it and just continue to voice that frustration and just continue to struggle. Bobby Knight, a well-known, world-renowned basketball coach, is in the Hall of Fame, everything else, said this best. If you were to, dwell on that mistake and be frustrated about it, that one mistake will turn into another one. And if you're still frustrated, it'll turn into another one. And if you're still frustrated, it turns into another one. So when moments happen like this, your brain just needs to adapt. And you just need to remember to keep that competitive mindset of just saying, this happened, but we need to reset, get focused again. If you were up, then just keep going. It's those things that, that's all I really need to say is just that you need to be ready to make adjustments, because things will happen. Hope for the best, plan for the worst, is this very well-known saying.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that the sort of player mindset comes into it there. It's frustrating to sort of be, a minute and a half away from winning the series that could be quite important for you, and against one of the higher seeded teams in the tournament, and that's a big deal. And to be playing with your sub for it as well, and great work to Prem when they reset. Hot Wheels Sid came back into the chair because he'd been doing fantastically in the first couple of games. So his internet was all sorted out by then. I don't know how analogous your situation is to this one. I don't know how you could really draw any kind of comparison to a real life sport for this situation, because this is a situation that is caused by, it's inherent to esports that we are running this. It's simulated on a server, and the server can have performance issues, and you can have connection issues with the server.
So to this specific scenario, no. To this specific kind of moment, yes. I've had multiple times where I've won basketball or even baseball games very simply by something that happened that frustrated the other person. If you're the guy that's flailing your arms in the air and saying, "Oh, come on, why did this just happen? This is ridiculous. This should have never happened." If you're going to do that, then you're not ready to be focused on it. Just be like, "Okay, this happened. It's frustrating.
John
Yes. but we
McEnroe
just
throwing
need
his
to get
tennis
back-
racket across the court, going, "You gotta be kidding me!"
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
that's what I mean. You can't show that serious amount of frustration to it. That's something that you just need to be focused. You always have to be ready for something to just happen. The ability to adapt is a major thing in any sport that you ever play. Esports, regular sports, whatever it is. You got to be ready for something that's going to happen. That's how that's going to go.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's obviously been various different opinions come out around this on Twitter and things from various different players who were part of the match who were unhappy with it, players who were part of the match who tried to justify it, players who were external to the match observing, like Gambit for example was quite vocal about it on Twitter. But at the end of the day, the rules exist. It wasn't a great situation. There was, I mean, at the end of the day, how often is it you see a game reset twice in a series? Like, there's clearly an issue there somewhere. So
we said we weren't going to talk too much about this. We don't have to probably kill too much more on it, in all honesty.
I was about to move on anyway. So, it's just,
sorry if I interrupted
comes back to just your mindset is everything. Don't get tilted and just don't, and then you're not going to, well, frankly, choke is what happened after that. Revival, clearly affected by that, went on to play lower quality Rocket League and they didn't win the series. So let's before we do move on, I'm just going to throw a quick comparison back, because if you remember at the international finals LAN for season 1, Kings of Urban were in the same situation but the other way round, because the Flying Dutchman had a connection issue and the game ended up getting reset. Now, I always found that reset very interesting, because the Flying Dutchman scored while they were a player down and were actually, winning the game. In my opinion, they should have just had the player come back in rather than reset the game entirely. But the game got reset anyway. Kings of Urban went from being behind to losing the game anyway. So this can always happen going both ways. So EU RLCS then, Sundays shenanigans. Some pretty interesting games, that's for sure. So we've touched on already that Oh My Dog showed up against Flipside, which, they seem to have this habit of playing really, really well against great teams and playing not so well against teams that are more around their level or below. Rawlings, you got any stats info that you can shed on this for us?
As far as Oh My Dog goes?
I mean, that's it. They seem to be good at... they seem to be the David in any David and Goliath situation, but when it's two Davids, they don't do so well.
It's a good way of putting it, actually. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, and generally across the line, they're pretty unspectacular. Turbo Pulsa is their leading goal scorer. They're leading a save getter by a significant portion. On an individual basis, you don't see a lot. I think that their average score per game is below the league average by a little bit there. So it really does seem unspectacular when you look at the player stats on an individual basis. When it switches over to the team side, let me just grab EU here.
Yeah, in comparison, Oh My Dog is averaging 1.58 right now goals per game, considered one of the lowest right now for sure in EU. Well,
I mean, the thing about Oh My Dog is they're definitely fighting their game. They're fighting in every game, because so far their series record is 2-3, so they got a 40% series win rate. But they've played 20 games across those 5 series, so they've got an average of 4 games per series. So they really are fighting it out. But it's interesting, because that sort of the other teams that are tying with them, so Reunited and Red Eye, currently tied with them in the league table with 2 games to 3. Oh My Dog sort of bang smack in the middle of that in terms of the games that they've played. And I find that really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So something that does stand out for Oh My Dog is they allow the second fewest shots against in Europe. So Northern Gaming leads with 5.4 shots against per game, whereas Oh My Dog is 7.53, and that's ever so close to Mocket, who are 7.74.
Yeah.
So if you want to look at maybe where Oh My Dog is getting their success, it's that they're limiting the number of shooting opportunities that the other team is getting.
Yes. I could definitely agree with that. I think that they're definitely one of the slower teams. I think that's. I think it's really interesting actually because in this season of RLCS we see sort of the legacy of Vogan, even though Vogan's not playing in it, because we see Dogu and Jesse's teams playing in very measured ways, and while that hasn't been greatly successful, especially in Summit's case, but Oh My Dog has. I sort of lump them into like half the teams in the tournament I sort of put down as instinctive, and the other half I put down as sort of much more measured. So you've got Northern Gaming, Flipside, Red Eye, and Reunited, all very instinctive teams. They fly by the seat of their pants, especially the Northern Gaming and Reunited, and it's just like there's a player in a spot and he does what he thinks is the best thing, and the rest of the players on the team are good enough to know what that's going to mean for where they need to be. And then you go back to Market Aces and sort of Precision Z, Oh My Dog, and Summit, where it's a much slower playstyle. They tend to absorb attacks and then try to counter attack. There's when given the opportunity, they'll slow down play and sort of try and set something up. And I love the fact that we've got sort of 2 and maybe if you're a little looser 4 sort of defined playstyles in this season of RLCS, because last season I felt like it was everybody else and then Mocket, and this season we're seeing something else. You're going to say something?
I don't know if I wouldn't necessarily say that there was just like random playstyles and then Mocket, because I mean
no I'm not saying random playstyles. No, I'm saying that in season 1 in a run up to LAN we had Mocket playing in a very measured style, and everybody else was just trying to play as fast as they could.
Okay, gotcha. So you're just talking about more of the pace of the game itself, not necessarily their style.
But
okay.
That is the style, though. When you get right down to it, that's the 2 defined styles of Rocket League. You've got as fast as you can, and then you've got build-up play.
Yeah, and I think it's best to look at that in terms of a spectrum as well. Mm-hmm. Like, last year at LAN in an RLCS, you saw Northern Gaming, and they were absolutely the pinnacle of an aggressive shooting style.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They limited the number of chances against them because they were doing the shooting all the time.
Yeah.
And it was just like pile driving teams.
It's very hard to shoot off your own backboard.
Exactly. Right. And even when you get that shot, it's like a clearance that trickled its way towards the net.
Yeah.
And that's just how they played. And I notice actually that Northern Gaming has slowed down with the roster change. Mystic is more of a player who is willing to make saves, and that speed is diminished slightly. And you see consequently that Flipside is taking more shots than anybody else in the league right now, but they're also giving up somewhere in the bottom 3 for number of shots that they're allowing. So they've taken that run and gun approach that Northern Gaming really had last time, and I think that's Greasy's influence on the team.
I think it's definitely Greasy's influence. I mean, I've talked in the past in various articles that I've done summarising Rocket League. If anybody's interested, I hopefully will be getting another one out this week. Maybe. We'll see. But with Greasy, like, he's added like almost like a whole nother set of tactics that Flipside can use into that, because what you see from Flipside now is you see actually a much wider spread of the kind of opportunities that they're taking on offense. Mm-hmm. Because before it tended to be sort of precision passes between players, and Cookser using his time machine to know exactly where the ball was going to be and just sort of using all of his boost to hover there until it bounces off him and into the goal. But you saw, Marky and Mike being very good at finding each other. You saw them being very good at finding Cookser having a great awareness of where the ball was going to be. Now Greasy's come in, and I'm seeing a lot more backboard passes from them, and it tends to be from Greasy. And that's really interesting to me, because it shows just like how important the individual players are to the team. And it comes back to what I was saying earlier on, that is 3 people too small for a team? When a team can change so dramatically because of a roster change. in their playstyle, because Flipside is a totally different team on a funds right now.
I like to see the personalities of the players kind of infuse themselves into the teams. Um, so just by way of comparison, Flipside has the lowest shooting percentage in, I believe, the league, but they have the best save percentage in EU.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a consequence of the way that they play and the velocity that they're playing at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think they'll just get stronger as the season goes on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it as a bad thing necessarily, but I think it's something that I would like to see teams sort of evolve less dramatically. Like, I'd like to think that like a roster change on a team isn't going to mean that that team is then playing in a very different way. But I think it's great because Greasy has added sort of those extra skill sets to the toolbox, and those extra kind of different ways of setting up plays and that kind of thing. Coming off the backboard a little bit more. Getting beaten by Oh My Dog, though, coming back to the sort of David and Goliath situation there, Oh My Dog really play up, but they do not have a good time playing at the same level as them, in my opinion.
Well, every so often, that's kind of how teams go. There's this different concept where when you feel like you're playing a team that's better than you want to try harder. Be the sweaty nerd as it is, the sweaty nerd try hard, as it would seem. But when you play against teams you feel like you're more comfortable with, they're acclimated, sometimes you feel like you don't have to grind as hard as you did. And you can just simply kind of coast through that game. But then you also then get curveball because they end up coming out to play better than you. So I think that Oh My Dog is kind of one of those classic teams that thinks like that. It's like, oh, we have Flipside Tactics. We need to try. We have Market Aces. We probably should do something. We have Reunited. We know their team is amazing. We should really do something about this. But they go against like Summit. They go against like Precision Z. Something like that. They're going to think they're around the same skill level we are, but we have beaten them before in the past. Something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what that comes down to, and I see this a lot in pro sports as well, especially being from Vancouver and watching the Vancouver Canucks play for the last forever. And it just really seems like when you're up against a team that is a skilled team that's high in the standings, like you mark that on your calendar, you look forward to that as a chance to prove yourself. Whereas the rest of the time, you're playing against an opponent and you just don't have that same, you're not as engaged with the idea of the game.
Right.
And that can really punish teams, especially in an esport right now where there hasn't really been a lot of talk about sports psychology, and preparation for games is something that is still being figured out by the individual teams. It's really interesting to see this factor of teams playing back-to-back games, and then one team is warmed up and then the other team goes out, and I'm paying attention to on a very high level as to how teams that are in their second game do as compared to their first game.
Right.
And it's really interesting to me to see which teams buck that trend, and which teams really seem subject to coming in colder in games. And the schedule is clearly posted. Everyone knows what's coming up. Everyone knows that it takes a little bit to get up to speed playing the game. So it really behooves everyone to do as much preparation as they possibly can to make sure that they are ready for these games. And there's some reasonable money on the line. And I really do think that as this esport matures, we're going to be seeing a lot more regimented approaches to how people start to play games. And then we'll maybe see how these results do as that corrects itself.
Yeah, I think that there's a big part of that, and I think that Oh My Dog are a victim of their playstyle to some extent. Like I said, that they're a bit more measured as a team compared to like the faster teams, and that's good because if we look at their results in RLCS, they have beaten Northern Gaming and they've beaten Flipside, who I would call out as the two fastest teams in EU.
Mm-hmm.
So they're very good against those teams that take a lot of shots. Because those teams that take a lot of shots, they're playing way up the field, and then they take the breakaway opportunities, and they come back and they get wins out of it. But then when they come up against somebody who plays in a sort of similar style to themselves, like Market Aces, it's a close series, but ultimately they lose because I'd kind of argue that Mockadaces are like the ultimate version of Oh My Dog's sort of general strategy,
Right.
if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Like, those are the masters.
It's the strategy with a stronger mechanical foundation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I hate to say, but I do quite agree. The one thing I'll say about Oh My Dog is the way that they play allows them to be in almost every single game.
Yeah.
And it reminds me a lot, as a hockey fan, of the New Jersey Devils back when the neutral zone trap was a thing. Basically, this defense that they pioneered that was intended to force teams to make bad plays to gain zone entries, and as a result from that, they could break out, and a lot of their goals came on these counterattacks because the other team was trying to push in too aggressively into their zone.
Yeah.
And that strategy became a point of a lot of consternation in the league for quite some time because people said, oh, well, it's really, really boring hockey. But the New Jersey Devils just didn't have the talent to go run and gun, so they did what they could to adapt and squeak out as many games as they possibly could. And Oh My Dog strikes me as sort of being similar to that. Like, obviously, they're very skilled players, but they're still pushing for that number 6 spot that Kapow used to hold in the power rankings, and it's tough to say if they're ever going to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it'd be interesting to see how that works as the players develop, and I think that's the really key point as well, is that there was not a lot of time between season 1 and season 2. Like, there was not enough time, in my opinion, for players to analyze the kind of personal level, like what their key development points are, and work on that in any kind of realistic way. But then also, to some extent, I question how much all of the players sort of spend on purely self-development rather than playing sort of more stuff, Interesting to see what will happen as we move forward. Other results from Sunday, which was yesterday, right? Sunday was yesterday.
Yes.
I've
interesting.
I've slept twice since then, so I've been very confused.
Yeah.
I'm on Tuesday right now. It is actually Tuesday here as well, which doesn't help. It's only 2:30 in the morning. So we saw Precision Z handily beating Red Eye. We saw Mockadaces handily beating Precision Z. And we also saw Mockadaces, I think, being the only people that won both their series. Is that right?
It looks Northern Gaming won both their
Northern
series.
Gaming won both their games.
Northern Gaming pulled out both of theirs. Summit still showing that they're on the bubble right now. Reunited, able to
beat Oh My Dog.
Able to win against Oh My Dog.
But
Oh My
lose to
Dog,
Northern
though,
Gaming.
clearing Flipside, which is surprising to me. And then Northern Gaming, of course, with their pretty much dominance for how they played. And then Flipside, surprising me personally, losing to both Oh My Dog and Mockadaces, which ended up costing them because now Mockadaces is now first, whereas Flipside now is bumped down a spot.
Well, I mean, does it surprise you though? I mean, given everything that we've just discussed, like Mockadaces and Oh My Dog are like the literal counter to Flipside's playstyle.
True. I can't deny that now that you say that.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting I really hope that the sort of different playstyles. Yeah, I hope that when we come back to season 3, or even when we see more teams, more rosters, more playstyles start to emerge, and we see the game move from being a sort of mechanical game to a strategic game. That's going to be really interesting to me. You guys got any other kind of highlights you want to talk about from RLCS?
Really, other than I guess Flipside taking a spot down on it, I think Europe side of things looks really great, as I said before, but that's probably being biased at this point, the amount of times I've said it. Just I think in general, I would love to see. I'm like quietly rooting for Deception because I'd love to see them develop. That's on NA, but more EU focus. If Summit wants to continue to exist, they're gonna have to change their life. So it's gonna have to be one of those things.
I will say, 7M managed to get himself a 100% shooting percentage last week.
Did he have any shots?
He had 2 shots.
And 2 goals. Good job, that guy. I mean, I was kind of worried that you were going to be like, it's a 0-0, 100% confirmed.
Right.
But
Zero out of zero is not 100%. That's always zero.
Oh, in a certain way of thinking.
no, zero out of zero is 100%. Like it has to be. It's the only time where you can divide by zero.
Oh, God.
But there we go. I think that as we move forward, we'll see what happens. So I can't remember last week if we talked about the fact that LAN was going to be in Amsterdam or whether we were just totally focused on Rocket League Extra Life.
We mentioned there was an announcement alongside with the big thing about Rocket League XL coming into play. That was one of our things as well.
Mm-hmm.
But we did mention it. It is going to be cool that it is over there. Very expensive for me. So if anybody's willing to give me, I think flights are approximately around 1,500 for me. So if you guys want to
I'm sure
help
you
me
could,
out,
I'm sure you could
love
find
it.
cheaper flights if you varied the airports you're looking at. Like, it's probably cheaper for you to fly to like San Fran and then fly from there.
Mm-hmm.
Like that wouldn't surprise me in the slightest because I know that somebody is doing that. Somebody is definitely flying from Michigan to California and then flying from California to London and then from London to Amsterdam. I can't remember who it is that's doing that, but somebody is doing that and it's working out like $500 cheaper or something to do that. So I guess you whenever traveling you have to make the decision of time versus cost, right? Like there's always a cheaper way to do it, but it's going to involve an investment of time. So,
Right.
but I've got my plane tickets. I've got my LAN ticket. Rawlings, I assume we're going to see you there as well.
I will certainly be there. Looking forward to it.
Oh, it's going to be great. So, it's going to be...
Amsterdam is one of my bucket list cities,
Well,
and
yeah.
I've known about this for a while, and it's been one of those things where I know something and I can't tell people, and it's
Yeah.
been tearing me apart. But it's going to be an absolute joy, and for all the Europeans that are out there that are listening to this that didn't have a chance to get to the first land, that was something special, and I fully expect this next one to be incredibly special as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, judging from the way that they've stepped everything up from season 1 to season 2, like you can only expect that the LAN experience is going to be stepped up as well. Availability of coffee shops nearby and lots of places to drink beer is always going to be helpful as well for any event where lots of people are gathering. So it's going to be fantastic. I'm really looking forward to it. I will say that if anybody's planning on going, then drop me a tweet. There we have a Discord set up for people going to LAN. We've got some Dutch guys in there who are being very helpful and sort of giving advice on the best places to potentially stay. Like we've got a guy in there. He's one of the Shift Pro League mods. He has actually been and like checked out where the venue is like in real life and sort of done a little wander around, see what's around, and sort of done a little recce of the area. So if you're interested, then drop me a tweet and I will give you the link for that Discord. And if you're interested in going to LAN, that could be quite helpful. See what other people are doing travel wise and hotel wise and all that kind of thing. So, let's move away from RLCS and talk about a team that didn't make it into RLCS in a sort of storied loss to Kden, who then lost to Luminous, if I remember right. PENTA Sports are actually doing really, really well in everything that isn't RLCS at the moment. You guys got any thoughts on that?
Well, obviously they're a quality team. They've hung out in the power rankings for the longest time. I think they peaked in the 5 spot, if I remember my numbers correctly. I remember that because Penta 5. But yeah, really, it is immensely disappointing to me that some of the teams that didn't make it, both on the NA side and on the European side, just didn't. Obviously it happened the way that it did. But there are some incredibly good quality Rocket League players out there that don't have an opportunity to compete in RLCS, and I'm really glad to see that in some cases people haven't just folded up and decided to go their own kind of ways. They've gone, fine, we're just going to dominate all of these tournaments, and we're going to be ready for the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really happy that they didn't split up. Like so often when a team doesn't make it into RLCS, it's like, oh well, I guess we're just not a team anymore. We didn't, we'll just move on. But obviously they've got the sponsorship and I imagine contracts and that kind of thing, and hopefully they're going to come back ever stronger. So, but just to sort of quickly talk about their results, we've seen them win ESL yesterday. 4-1 against Reality.
Mm-hmm.
On going back a little bit further, we saw them. They lost to Northern Gaming in the semi-finals of Gfinity, but still had a good run to get to those semi-finals in the first place. Although that was the first Gfinity that didn't have 7 out of the 8 league play teams in it, so a little bit of an easier run on the 3v3 EU Gfinity on Friday. Possibly because of the market tournament that happened, which we'll talk about very briefly in a second. And then they've just been doing well, really. I mean, they lost to Reality week before last in ESL in the final 4-3. So seems to be that ESL is just on a Sunday is all about the Reality Penta game, right? As all the RLCS guys are busy.
Right.
Yeah, so guys, I think that there's are there any other sort of on the bubble teams that you guys want to talk about that aren't in RLCS, because we have been so RLCS focused while RLCS has been on?
Oh, that's a good question. I can't think of the Lucky Bounce. When they recently changed around their roster, people were talking to me recently that they are really seeming like they are downhill. I think they got upset first round, I believe, in the NA side of things the other day. So it kind of scares me on how their process is. So they're a work in development right now, unfortunately.
Well, Lucky Bounce is just Timothy and friends at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
whereas before, you know, Torment and Darkfire went on to Vendetta, now Vindicator. So that's actually something we didn't talk about. Vindicator playing with Matt and playing very well with Matt. So no Lethamyr after all the
Matt
drama.
annoys me.
No Karma, and now we have Matt in there instead. But he seemed to add he seemed to sort of be involved in the rotations a lot more than either Lethamyr or Karma had ever been.
Yeah, and I think that in a lot of ways is by design. Obviously, when you've got a cadre like Torment and Darkfire that have played together forever, they have a certain understanding, and it's hard to kind of break into that.
Mm-hmm.
But Matt demonstrated that he could do quite well there. He had in 8 games, he had 9 goals and 8 assists, which temporarily puts him in the 1 goal, 1 assist cadre of players that currently no one is in RLCS right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting to talk about. I think that Turtle had a stream after RLCS yesterday, and he was talking about how they did, and obviously he was very disappointed. He said primarily that it wasn't that they were beat; they beat themselves. Was the crux of his argument, and he doesn't feel like the team composition had much to do with it on Vindicator's side. He says they just came out flat and they got punished for it severely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always nice to see teams actually using their subs in the league play. Like, we've talked about this, I think, as well on previous weeks. But Rawlings, again, I'd appreciate your input coming back to this topic. But teams not using their subs during league play, like, how prepared are those subs going to be if they have to play during playoffs or the LAN?
Yeah, that's a tough one to say, because I think in a lot of cases the subs that belong to some of these teams were more of an afterthought than a primary consideration. And that surprises me, because if you want to practice together as a team, it can be hard to get exactly 3 people together. But if you've got a fourth that can come in there and assist that you can 2v2 versus each other. In the event that someone just can't make it, then you've got a full roster of 3 that you can just scrim with, and generally have players. Like, I know when Karma was doing her tryout in the different games that they were playing, they were like, okay, now we want you to fill Darkfire's role.
Yeah.
Because maybe something happens to Darkfire. We want you to be doing more of that, high percentage striking that Darkfire is known for. So, go in and get some experience doing that. In the event that something happens, we want to make sure that the players that we have can do that, and that's really forward thinking.
Yeah, well, that's it, and that's actually something that I want to see more teams doing, because to some extent, like, a sub for your RLCS team needs to be the best player on your roster, because they have to be flexible enough to fill the shoes of one of the normal starting. Although I think that as we move forward in the future, we might see very much more varied rosters in tournaments, and I think that as more LAN tournaments become a thing, and more just generally teams are sort of full time taking part in tournaments, we'll see more varied rosters from teams sort of consistently across the board, and you won't just have like these are the 3 people that are playing in RLCS. You'll have these are the 4 people that are playing in RLCS, and different combinations will be used, and it'll be almost like a tech decision, like running a certain card in Hearthstone to counter a certain deck. You'd be like, well, if we run if we run Matt instead of Karma, then that's going to change our playstyle enough that it's going to maybe throw Exodus off balance, and then they win against Exodus. And I'd really like to see, using both map picks and, your roster picks for individual series, like, let's see these people switch in and out and sort of use that to throw opponents off balance and change your playstyle. And then it'll be like, last time they ran this team against us, so hopefully they'll use the same team again because we can then take this team in. And you end up with the sort of multi-step strategic thinking that I really want to see more of in the esport.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we're barely scratching the surface in terms of tactical map picking, and even further to that, individual player choices. I would love to see some event in the future that says, hey, bring a 4-man roster and everyone has to play this many times, or you have to rotate your roster every single game.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because one of the things I struggle with as a stats guy is a lot of people say, who's the best player? And
on the stats, it's the guy who played one game, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that can certainly happen. But the bigger thing is, when teams play together as 3 people on the same team over and over and over again, you don't know what impact individual players have on that effect.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, you scored a lot of goals, but the other 2 players contributed to you getting those goals. And the only way that you get a really good sense of the quality of a player is when they're all playing multiple games with multiple different groups of people. So in hockey, they will track Fenwick, for instance, which is a shot differential while a player is on the ice. So if your team takes more shots than the other team does, then that shows well on you as a player. Or PDO, which doesn't actually stand for anything, which measures relative shot percentage and save percentage. These are things that are used to determine how good an individual player is. But when the same players are always playing against each other, you can't isolate that variable and say, this is what this player represents on aggregate. And, I'd love for an opportunity where a tournament forces players to play on different rosters so that I could get some of that data so that we could have a better conversation about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely something that will come in the future, and it's something that I've thought about a few times, obviously being so involved in so many different tournament organisers at this point. Like, I'm always thinking about what can be the next thing that can sort of differentiate a tournament, rather than just being, this is another 3v3 tournament. Like, how can we incentive players to take part? How can we incentivize people to watch? How can we incentivize, unusual map picks to make a more interesting viewer experience? Or, who can we get into cast? And all of these things are things that you have to consider when organizing a tournament. Like, a lot of people think that, putting on a tournament is just a case of like, here's a tournament and people can play in it. And there's a lot of factors that you have to consider and to make it a success. And there's always a cost of either time or money, and usually both, because if you don't have a prize pool, then not many people are going to show up. So there's always these things to balance, and I'll be fascinated to see, like, as the sort of, the Intel Extreme Masters and DreamHack and stuff like that starts moving into the Rocket League scene, which will happen. Like, we know that that's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. And I'm really looking forward to when that happens, because quite honestly, then I'll be able to make a living as a caster.
Yeah, I want to see more pro draft style tournaments.
Yeah,
and I want to see more Swiss style tournaments, because those are absolutely my favorite format.
Yeah, they're so hard, they're so annoying to run online. Like, they're not necessarily hard to run, but it's difficult. Like, I've been involved in a couple of different Swiss tournaments, most notably the Hype qualification tournament, where they got the other 15 teams into the league that they've been running. And that was a nightmare, because so many people signed up and thought that it was just a bracket, so they lost their first game and then disappeared, and we could never get hold of them again.
Right.
that is definitely a weakness of that system. Is it really doesn't handle dropouts particularly well.
Yeah, well, that's it exactly, and it's a lot of games that you're asking people to play, and for a sort of, I guess, a rookie team competing, they expect to go out in the first couple of series, then all of a sudden it's like, oh well, I actually have to go make dinner, or like take the dog out for a walk, or my parents are shouting at me, and I'm used to entering a tournament and playing 2 series, and then that's it. Oh, now I've signed up for this tournament, I have to play 7 series, and that's going to take a lot longer.
Right.
But we'll get there. I think that it's just a case, as so many things that we've discussed today, of just reaching maturity in the scene. So
Yeah.
let's talk about the latest invitational tournament that Mocket has put on. We'll talk about it briefly, just because Mocket has a lot of controversy within the scene. Like, a lot of people aren't a fan of the way the organization operates, but at the end of the day, they are getting teams paid, and that is a good thing. And I want to try and be objective about them as much as possible. So we did see their tournament go on, and we saw Mocket Aces come through and win against Precision Z. And now I've done with the objectivity bit, and I'm going to come round to how appropriate is it for a team you sponsor to compete in tournaments you put on?
Well, I mean, I'm sure that someone mentioned that they really should be doing this tournament, or other than the fact that we need to remember that what else is going on that day for that prize pool to not be, like willing to go to it. I mean, Flipside Tactics went into this tournament and stuff like that. It's a bigger prize pool. I mean, you go where the money goes a lot of times. So
No, but moving aside from that, but like Mocket Aces competing in Mocket's tournament, like how appropriate is that? Is that not like a conflict of interest?
When you say how appropriate is that, is it
I mean, like, if you're a lawyer, you don't represent your brother in court.
Gotcha.
So imagine a scenario where a game starts, and partway through the game there are some connection issues, and the game has to be canceled and replayed. It's a hypothetical situation, and let's imagine that it happened to be involving a tournament organizer and a team that was sponsored by that tournament, and it worked in their favor. How would that be seen?
Like that's
I think that is the crux of it, and they expose themselves to a lot of risk by doing that. And it's really hard for me to argue that that's the right call.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I agree with, and it's something that like, I've never really agreed with Mythical Esports. I was there when that started, and I'm not involved with it any longer. Still, know all the guys over there and stuff. But they have a team that they sort of have their name on, Mythical, and that team competes in their tournaments. And I've always just thought that it's just not something you should do.
I think that they're going into the mindset of it's another tournament that we could potentially win money in. I'm sure that it's not likely.
But it's the conflict of interest thing, isn't it? Like, that's the issue.
Well, yeah,
like, that's what it comes down to.
I mean, in a real world, if the place that they do, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm saying terrible words right now. If the organization that pays you to go out and play in tournaments, but then you go and play in your own tournament that you sponsor yourself, it's just like you said, that conflict of interest is kind of like, is this really? Because if you win it, then everybody's like, well, isn't this kind of rigged? Or at least from the outside perspective, I think that would be considered. I'm sure the people that know the actual players, I'm sure they're not like, oh, they totally didn't do this for that reason. But at the same time, though, I can see what you mean, though.
Like 99% of the time, 95 to 98 to 99% of the time, there will be no controversy because there won't be any question whatsoever. But it's that edge case that, when it happens, could seriously damage the credibility of a league or a series of tournaments.
Yeah.
And I don't want anyone to be in that position.
Right.
I mean, look at the controversy over
their own doing.
Yeah, look at the controversy over the RLCS decision. And I mean, at the end of the day, somebody has to make a call, and a decision has been made, and let's move on with our lives. Like, whether it was the right call or not, like, in a sporting situation, the call is made, and then afterwards you analyze, and if it's not the right call, then you change the rules to support what should have been the call for the next time that situation occurs. Like, so much of sports, especially with such a young sport, is that here is a problem that we have. We dealt with it at the time because we had to deal with it at the time. Was that the right way to deal with it? We'll find out later on, and then we'll adjust and adapt. And you see rule changes in sports all the time as consequences to that.
Honest question, because I have not browsed any Reddits or anything like this for any Reddits, anything on Reddit for this. Have they actually had anything, or has anybody said anything about this being really controversial? Has there been anything like really big spark yet, or is it just like, oh, they won the tournament?
I don't know. I haven't seen anything today, so I think that largely Mocket is ignored at this point. I think that generally speaking, their viewership is a casual viewership, and that casual viewership doesn't engage on Reddit.
Well, I'm sure it doesn't help that they just had over half of their people leave, and one of their casters was on Gfinity today. So,
well, yeah, I mean, there's been lots of things that have happened that aren't necessarily sort of something that I necessarily want to go into here, but we've just hit an hour and a half, so I think we're gonna wrap it up at this point. So, Rawlings, thank you for joining us on very short notice, as it turned out that Curtis's Wi-Fi was not going to support being on a podcast for an hour and a half. So thanks for showing up.
Whatsoever. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, but you're replacing Curtis. You've got a more professional situation there. Like, you got like sound blocks on the background. You got like a nice big pop filter right there. Like, everything's clearly working properly.
Yeah, I just happen to be hanging out at my work that has a webinar room, so
yeah,
it works out in the end. I've got like sound baffling triangle things over here that I haven't even shown you guys yet.
Oh wow, there we go. Go on, give us a little spin of Rooney on the camera.
Here, let's take a look at these.